Welcome to the Natural Super Kids podcast, where you will discover practical strategies to inspire you to boost the health and nutrition of your kids. I'm Jessica Donovan, a qualified naturopath specialising in kids' health, and I want to make it as easy as possible for you to raise healthy and happy kids. Let's get into it. Hello. Well, I've been loving some of the conversations I've been having for the podcast. I've been doing solo episodes for quite a while, and it's just really nice to be talking to like-minded people that kind of complement what we do and our approach here at Natural Super Kids. And today's podcast is no different. So I am talking to Dino Mennillo, who is the founder and national director of occupational therapy for children. So one of our beautiful members and clients, Katie, put me on to or suggested him as a podcast guest. And I'm so glad I had this conversation with him. We could have talked for hours. We were very like-minded. So he's an occupational therapist and he specializes in AIRS sensory integration. So we're talking a lot about supporting neurodivergence, supporting sensory integration, and there's a whole lot of other sort of topics that we cover in here. We both get a little sort of personal. We've both got older kids and sharing, our insights, I guess, from what we would like to see happen a bit more in childhood and how that is going to be really helpful for kids, for their physical health, their emotional health, their well-being, their mental health, and their, sensory integration, which is a topic that Dino is very passionate about and knowledgeable about. So it was a great chat. I hope you really enjoy it. And here's Dino. Hello, Dino. Welcome to the Natural Super Kids podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm very excited to pick your brains and find out more about the work you do. I was just talking to you off air that it was one of our long-term members and clients that suggested you as a guest. So, I've had a little look at your website and your work looks really interesting. So do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do?
Sure. So, look, I'm an occupational therapist. I have been for close to 30 years now. My area of, my focus area, the area that I've specialised in over the majority of those years has been in the area of paediatrics. I started a background in child and adolescent mental health. So I'm also a mental health endorsed OT. So I can straddle both sides, but my passion has always been really more so in the pediatric world initially, and specifically working with more complex developmental issues such as autism spectrum disorder, Down syndrome, a lot of children with sensory processing disorders, and I can explain a bit more about that. But I also then specialised and did postgraduate training in AIRS sensory integration therapy, which is a very niche area of OT that for many, many years wasn't an evidence-based intervention, but through a lot of people doing a lot of research and a lot of hard work over the last 15 to 20 years, it is now recognised as a very strong evidence-based intervention and of a gold standard, which is fantastic. And I've connected with people over the US and brought them over for training. And eventually, probably maybe 10 years ago, I started my progression as training to become an instructor for that internationally. So I'm also accredited to do that instruction of that certification course under the direction of the US company. So that's pretty much me in a nutshell. What else do you know? The practice has been around for over 30 years. I've been the director of OTFC for nearly 22 years now. And we've grown, we've branched our services, we've grown nationally. I'm now based in Melbourne. So I've moved here with my wife, my wife is the CEO, and she has been for a number of years. And, we grew from just being me as the OT, because I had a few staff when I took over, but they, for whatever reason, left and some of them retired. And then NDIS did create the opportunity for that business to grow. So we've got one practice in Gold Coast in Queensland, where my daughter lives, my two practices in Melbourne, and six in South Australia.
Wow,
And
six in
probably,
South
yeah,
Australia.
we have about now just over 100 staff. And we are
Wow.
only an OT based company. We don't do anything else. That's all we do.
Wow.
We stick
That's
in our lane.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm based in South Australia. I thought you were still here, but that's great to know that you've got clinics all around, practices all around.
Yeah, look, the sensory integration therapy that we do is in a clinic. So it's and our clinics are really specifically designed. If anyone sees our website, they are very purpose built for what we do. And I've had a really keen interest. My dad was a builder, so I've had a very keen interest in design of these spaces and how they work. And so we also branched out into working with adults with sensory issues in South Australia. We opened up actually was the first clinic internationally that was designed and built for adults with sensory issues, and that's at Mile End, and that's been over 8, nearly 9 years now, and it's an amazing facility, and we're lucky we didn't have to build it in this day and age because they do cost quite a bit. But we have two in Melbourne that are purpose built for older children and adolescents and young adults as well. So they are designed very differently to traditional sort of clinic rooms. So you can see they look like big gyms and big play centers, but they're very, very purposeful, and we have to be very careful with what we do because kids can get hurt doing what in our spaces as well. So you have to be very well trained to be able to use this space. We often get asked, would we do birthday parties in our space? They're not suitable for those things, but yeah. So
Not the right
that's
use.
the
Yeah.
business side of things, and we have a
Yeah.
large corporate group that manages the business and executive committee and executive people as well. So I don't like doing that. Like that's not my area of passion. I'm still a clinician. I'm treating and assessing kids now full time again, which I love. So
Yeah,
yeah.
amazing. So yeah, there's so many things I wanna ask you. Let's start with neurodivergence. So what are some of the most important things that parents should understand from your perspective as an OT about neurodivergence? Because we've got a lot of listeners and people in our community that have had some sort of neurodivergent diagnosis for their child.
Mhm. Look, the thing I think that's most important is understanding that regardless of a diagnosis, or regardless of what you do in terms of intervention, the child is still the same child. Like inherently, don't, they don't metamorphose. There's no metamorphosis into something that's completely different to what your child would have been without intervention. It's trying to improve the quality of that life and opportunity for them. And so if something like autism cannot be cured, something with ADHD is very difficult to manage without having a medical or a biomedical approach as well. So it's not just medication or just therapy, it's a combination of things. So when I talk to parents about what potentially will help their child, it's not one approach and one therapy, it's a team of people. And I always say, build your team, like build your team of people and hope that they can stay with you for that journey, especially in that initial phase, and that they work in a very complementary way with each other, because then that communication really works to optimize the outcomes. And that's always for me starts with a pediatrician, okay? Because look, they don't have to prescribe medication. Sometimes they just oversee the medical intervention model that you go. So a lot of our families choose not to engage in medication. They'll go down a more of a natural biomedical pathway. And we are really supportive of whatever parents' approach they take. Some look at gut health and really go into gut health and achieve some remarkable results with their young people. And in combination with, say, speech, OT, psych at the right time, and then involving the education system, because that's where they have to end up anyway, right? Every child has to be enrolled in an education system of some sort, whether that's a homeschooled approach, whether that's a special school, special class, or a mainstream. So working with the educators is really important, and having that team get together and be on the same page with the parents is critically important.
Yeah, I'm totally, totally agree with all of that. That real holistic, complementary approach, I think, is so important. And I love that sort of, approach of building a team. And I don't know if you know much about our work, but we're all about, gut health and
Yeah,
nutrition,
100%.
and coming about it from that sort of perspective. But yeah, and that there's just so many ways that we can support kids in general and neurodivergence as well. So you talked about sensory integration therapy being one of your kind of specialty areas. What are some of the early signs that you see in kids that suggest sensory issues, sensory processing challenges?
Sure. I think depending on how sensitive or acutely aware a parent can be, sometimes they identify them very early on. So a child that's even 12 months of age can show like levels of irritability, crying all the time, difficulty adjusting when new people come into spaces, or a dislike of being in the bath or having their nappy changed. All these things, when the reaction and the response can be extreme and lasting for a long time and not improving in terms of them getting used to it or tolerant, can sometimes be reflective of some what we would generally call sensory modulation difficulties. That is, that they have a higher level of reactivity, so they're more sensitive than what would be considered typical, right? So we all have sensory preferences. Some people like some levels of light or some types of food or some types of clothing. We don't exist that we all just have the same level of tolerance, right? And it changes through our life. Like we sometimes don't like something and then we do like something, or we couldn't tolerate something and then we do at a later stage in life. And sometimes it reverses where we enjoy movement when we're younger, but as our nervous system ages, it doesn't need it as much. And therefore, when we do have that input, it becomes overwhelmed by it. So we're managing this through our lifespan. The other component of the nervous system relates to the way in which we process information that supports development. And those sensory components integrated, they have to work together. So your eyes or your visual processing works with your auditory processing together with your movement system, which is called your vestibular system, your proprioceptive system. You have an olfactory and a gustatory system as well. And there is this internal sensation or regulator, we call that interoception, right? Now, it all has to work together to give you the most accurate information about what's happening around you so that you can then do something. Okay, so when a child first starts to experience the world, they're taking in all this sensory input and organizing it in their brain instinctively. And the more they do something or repeat an action, then the closer they get it to being accurate, the more likely that that pathway will be developed. Okay, that's essentially what we're looking at. When we're assessing children across those areas, we are using a very, very well-developed assessment tool. Again, you have to have postgraduate in this assessment tool to be able to assess sensory processing. And you then can get a profile of the child to see where the areas of strengths, the challenges are, and then you can target those areas in therapy. So what we do looks like play. Honestly, it's ridiculous to get like there. I've been doing this for over 25 years, and every day I have to pinch myself to say I actually get paid to do this. Like this is ridiculous.
Paid to play.
Yeah, but it looks like that. The actual therapist's ability and skill is that it has to look like play, but you are solving problems for children internally. You are helping them adjust and get able to use their body more effectively, able to learn how to plan and sequence their body to do things like hold a pencil, draw, but you don't do it by doing the activity. You have to integrate the foundational level to be able to support the more complex skill development. And that's a neurodevelopmental approach. And it sits so perfectly well with a neuroaffirming approach, particularly for kids with spectrum disorders. I knew 20 years ago, 25 years ago, that the sensory integration therapy worked for kids, but the evidence didn't back it up. But now that you have the strong research, there's a lot more confidence. And I think as people have become more aware of what their options are in therapy, and with podcasts, with social media, they see what's possible with children. They don't stick to the old, maybe more traditional way of approaches with those types of therapy, where children were maybe a little bit more conditioned into responses. nowadays they can get equally the same benefits from doing something that's more neuroaffirming and far more engaging for children and for parents as well. Parents feel a lot more empowered with our therapy because we involve them in that as well. The more they learn, the more that they can do with their children at home.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's actually fun for kids. So I imagine, that kids actually enjoy and look forward to these sessions.
Yeah, look, it is. Sometimes we have parents who say, if they're having this much fun, they can't be learning. And I say, no, that's the complete opposite. You'll never, ever feel like you're having to do something that's difficult if you enjoy what you're doing and you're learning doing it. Like it's part of the premise behind the theoretical approach that was developed by Jean Ayres was that the child has to actively be engaged. They have to want to be there and do it and play. And it's the skill of the therapist to be able to modify that to address the areas of need without the child thinking that they're actually working.
Yeah, yeah, got it. Well, we support a lot of families with sensory challenges that show up like, fussy eating or sleep issues, behavioral challenges. So, I know you've just told us a little bit about your therapy. What would you say to parents? Like, where can they start at home? What are some of the things that they can do at home if they're seeing some of these signs of like, kids getting irritated by their tags, or I'm just thinking of some of the common ones, or kids just not wanting to eat certain foods, and it seems like it's a sort of sensory issue?
Sure. The first thing I do is don't force them. Like that I think only creates a level of reaction behavior that means that even if they were willing to try something they won't trust, and then they won't, on the basis of whether they perceive it might be something they don't like a food, they won't try it. So my advice is initially back off, but make observations. Like if they don't like the tags on their clothes to start with, all right, cut them off. Like you pick your battles, right? With food, it's difficult. Food is the most complex thing to work on because it covers so many sensory components. Okay, you don't have just taste or smell. You have texture, so it's feel. You have the visual aspect of it as well. Some children don't like the sound of food that they're eating. So you add in, there's also a proprioceptive component of what they get through their jaw when they're chewing. So you have 6 components that you can have that can prevent a child from eating one type of food. And unless you can sort out all of those. So what I tell parents is watch what foods they do eat. Like, okay, so it gives you an indication. Okay, is it food that's always soft? Is it white food? Is it bland food? Now, if you've got that as a basis, okay, build from there. Find something that doesn't extend much from that. Okay, you can't jump from, you know, we often call them the chug it kids because they only eat chicken nuggets and chips, right?
Yeah.
But if they only eat that, then you're not going to jump to some colorful looking mess of concoction of food that you're going to go, well, try this. That's like a green curry or something. They're not going to eat it.
No.
But they might progress to something like, and this has worked in the past for us. I've told a parent crumb cauliflower,
Yes.
right? Because it has that bland appearance, and when you crumb it, it loses its taste really, and it tastes like a crumbed item. And kids tend to eat it, and the texture is pretty soft. So it's just trying to shift things marginally, but make observations about them. If it's movement, you don't mess with movement. Like if a child is averse to being on a swing, you don't push them on a swing to get past it. You start with what can they do with their own body that feels comfortable. Can they go to a playground and do some climbing equipment? And if they feel safe with that, then they're getting off the ground a little bit and they're learning about how their body moves, and they're still getting the sensation of movement, that gravity affects them in a different way, but not in terms of a swinging movement or rotational movement. And so I always tell parents, just start with the base where they're really comfortable, and then think about being a scientist who just manages to incrementally change something to see if it makes a difference. And if they tolerate that, then increase the next step. But don't move too quickly. Sometimes they get good results and they think, oh, now they can go on a swing because they managed to go on, on a seesaw. So now I can put them on a swing. No, they're very different, but that's the basis of how we would progress things in terms of, especially for tolerance for kids of movement and things like that.
Yeah. And it sounds very similar to our approach, like with the fussy eating, yeah, never forcing. We're big fans of the division of responsibility. The parents are responsible for what's being served, what's available, but ultimately the child is responsible for what they're eating and how much they're eating. But yeah, building, I really love that. What you talked about, building on what they already like. If they like crunchy foods, can you make some, veggie chips, or the nugget example, how can you maybe make your own nuggets at home and blend in some veggies or something? Yeah, building on those textures and things that they already like. And talking about the swinging and the outdoor play, I'd love your thoughts on, we know that kids are spending so much more time indoors than they are outdoors. This is something we've been talking about quite a lot recently, all the things that kids are missing out on by spending so much time indoors. How do you think that's kind of contributing to sensory issues? Do you think it's a big deal?
My advice to parents is, if you can, and it's not going to happen, if you can get rid of social device, like social media, yeah, that too. But if you can get rid of electronic devices for your children and limit like TV watching to like an hour a day, then you are going to support your child having to figure out how to play and how to find other options. Now, what does that involve? That also involves parents being proactive and taking that responsibility to be a part of their child's life to support that. Because those devices and those, things are they provide a very quick dopamine hit, right? And it's addictive. And a child's brain doesn't know how to switch off or know when it's too much. It
Yeah.
just doesn't have the ability to do that. So
I mean, we struggle enough as adults, don't we?
absolutely. So it's, to say that they shouldn't access it at all, I don't think it works in an age where we use technology for a lot of things, and it's a part of life. But managing it and having balance in those things. I always say, like, 1 hour of screen time equates to an hour at least of physical activity, right? And so if you can get that balance, then I think that's really better than saying don't do it at all. I remember with my children when they were growing up, we never did screen times or gaming or anything in the morning before school. And we never ever had the TV or screens on up from the dinner point on. And I know we did that till they were 12 years of age. And we then had to invent game, like we played games. We went out, we did more, but parents say, oh, but I work. Look, I would argue that I work just as much, if not more, than most people do in an ordinary week, right? And if I could find time to do it, I'm pretty sure you can. It's a question of, do you want to? And my advice to parents is, you only get one shot at this. Like, you don't get to go back in time. You don't get a second shot. Like, what you provide for your children from the ages of 12 months to 12 years of age sets them up for life. You cannot suddenly think at 12 that you're going to instill all these habits and routines and being physically active and being routine based for things like screen time. You're never going to introduce it at that point and be successful. You're going to have a fight on your hands. But if you promote, healthy eating, if you promote physical activity and the importance of looking after your body, if you promote health and hygiene for your children as part of just daily routines that happen naturally, and you have an example that your parents are also doing that as well, that's another thing.
Yes.
What they see is what they do.
Totally.
Right?
Yes.
And if you can do that early on, then it might not mean that they develop into these amazing adults, but you give them the best opportunity to do that, to reach their potential. Now, the rest is what they do with it, but that's a great platform to start with. And as a parent, particularly as, kids don't live at home anymore, you think, well, at the end of that, you say, A, geez, that went really quickly. And B, you think to yourself, I did everything I could to give them that opportunity, and I'm happy. You'll always be happy with that. Whatever path they take, you'll say, I've given them that opportunity, and it's the most important job you will ever have in your life.
Yeah. And I think we can both, I mean, I've got an 18 and a 16-year-old. So, I really resonate with the, like, God, it goes so quick. And we always went camping a lot and did lots of outdoorsy things when they were little, and they definitely have followed that through. They still drive me crazy with how much, I'm still telling them to get off their phones all the time. But my son's, going camping with his mates, going mountain biking. So that's still in him, So I feel like those foundations are really set early on. So yeah, love all of that.
There's a rule that I always, and I instill this on parents and say, I don't ever ask you to do something that I haven't done or not prepared to do myself. So I would always say one of my number one top parenting tips has always been say yes when you can say yes. It's the hardest thing to do, but say yes when you can say yes. And they say, what does that mean? I say, well, you get home from work, you've had a busy day, and I'd always feel guilty because I'm working and playing with kids all day and get home, and the kids would say, Dad, can we go out and play on the playground? Or can you take us to the playground? Or can we go ride our bikes? And sometimes I felt like I'm so exhausted. I just want to
yeah, you got to dig deep.
but
Yeah.
I'd go, yes, because I can say yes.
Yeah.
So that when you say no to something, they can accept the no because they understand there is a reason. So if, for instance, I would say no, it's really late and or it's raining outside and I'm worried that something will happen if we ride our bikes. So we'll do that when it's safer. Okay. But if they get no when there's times where you could have said yes, then what do kids do, especially at shopping centres? They just keep badgering the parent because they eventually might give in, and then that pattern gets reinforced.
Yeah, and I get it. Parents are exhausted, but I'm having this vision of like, no, I haven't got time to play. And then they see us on our couch, on the couch scrolling on our phones or whatever, like that message. So yeah, I get that parents are stretched and there's a lot to do. And, those parents that are in the thick of it, like it is really hard, but the time does go really quick. And I don't think you ever regret saying, yes, let's go outside and kick the footy or, go to the beach and build a sandcastle. Because before long, what was that?
When they're older and they actually want to spend time with you, then you realize it's because you spent time with them.
Yeah.
Parents get that whole thing of that nostalgia of, oh, I wish my child spent time with me. And you think, well, did you spend time with, like, it's true, like what, like that. And it doesn't mean that you have to be with them all the time. It's just that when you're available and you're present, be present, right? That's the important thing, is that when you can be present, be truly present, put the phone away, be interested in what their interests are, who their friends are, what they do. They certainly will value that effort and that contribution to that for their whole life. And then they'll want to hang out with you.
Yeah.
Pretty simple.
Yeah. And exactly. And that point you said, we've got to be good role models for them. We're not kicking them outside and telling them to spend time outside while we're inside. I always say, one of the best ways to get our kids outside more is to go with them, and we need more outdoor time as well as adults. So loving this conversation. So what about, like, I know you talk about play and how important play is, it's the key to development. Can you explain why play is so powerful, particularly when it comes to brain health?
Well, we could talk about play for hours, but there's so many facets to play that enable a child to learn and to grow. Like the use of imaginative play is so important for development. Kids develop narrative from imaginative play. They develop a storyline, and so when they get to school and they have to write stories or use that creative element, it's already been developing from an earlier age. They often well, in the old days when people couldn't afford toys, they would do something called object substitution in play, and they would substitute the real item with something that was maybe not even close to looking like a doll, like it could have been a stick, or it could be a spoon. And they would substitute that, and then they would add that I guess that imaginative component to their play as well. And it's social. It usually involves other people. There are stories and rules, and being able to include others in play obviously adds the complexity to it. And then play changes as children get introduced to a school. I often say that school can at times be the death of the creative child, but it's not like that in all schools. Some schools really enhance that, and you see that as they get older and they go into those specialist subjects, whether like art and design or theatre, and they can be creative still way through all the way through their educational journey. But it's not so much of a focus, particularly for boys when sports come along as well, right? And that's a different level of play and a different type of play. But what it's always doing is it's creating opportunities for not only the physical development, but the cognitive development. And so there is an active brain thinking and working, whether it's subconscious, conscious, it's predicting in advance what should happen. It's then relating it back, and the body's doing things with it as well. Okay, and it's learning. So all these amazing processes happen naturally. Sensory integration, the process itself, when included in play, is a natural process. It's not something that you sign up for. It happens
Yes.
automatically. It happens within every person. It doesn't always happen well within every individual, but it happens naturally. And so, if you have a child that has a certain genetic makeup, they are then exposed to things environmentally, and then that together enables, mostly through play, for a child to develop. Play is the major occupation of childhood. Like, it's their main job,
Yeah.
right?
And
So
we don't value that as a society, as much as we should, I don't think.
no, and there's so much research as well. Like, if
Mm.
and it's across many sectors, not only OT but speech and psych and pediatrics. The importance and the understanding is there, but again, people get, I guess they get driven to things like, when I see parents come in with 4-year-olds and saying, we want you to teach them to write, we want you to teach them to write, and they're not writing and saying, but they're 4,
Yeah.
right? I just want them to, they should just be playing.
Yeah. They
They
don't
should
need
be
to be
exposed
writing
to
and reading.
learning in a
Yeah.
really fun way. Literacy and numeracy can be introduced way before they attend, kinder level, but in a really fun and engaging way. And things that worked 40, 50, 60 years ago, they still work today. Don't take away the components of those valuable play interactions that children had, with real, I guess, like with balls and sand and digging and water and exploring and climbing and swinging off trees and making tree houses and doing things. Again, I see a greater generation of risk averse parents who don't allow that. So the major thing we understand about sensory integration is a child learns when they fall. All right, that's the premise of what we do. You have to learn when you fall. Now, you hope they don't fall and hurt themselves, but when the body falls, it adjusts, it recalibrates, and then it will factor in the change, and it will get better. But if you don't allow them to do it because you're afraid they're going to hurt themselves, then they don't develop. It's as
Yeah.
simple as that.
Yeah, I think that's a big problem these days. I actually had a conversation on a recent podcast with Nikki from the Wildlings Forest School, and we were talking, about this and like how parents are kind of playing into the fact that kids are less risky because of rules that are being set. And so I think we need to let our kids, experience those risky behaviors, obviously within limits.
Yeah,
But I see
absolutely.
that as a I guess a challenge that a lot of parents have.
Yeah,
And
it
I
certainly
loved
is
what
a
you
challenge.
said about the fact that, it doesn't have to be set or a thing that we do, like just letting our kids play. And we were talking in that previous podcast about free play. Kids are so scheduled these days. Well, they're doing
Mm.
music and they're doing this sport and they're doing that. And we want to give our kids all these opportunities, but then that's giving them less opportunity for that, that just free play, which is so valuable, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I heard I did coin the phrase, but so I heard from somebody who said, kids just don't know how to be bored these days. Right. And I thought, well, what does that actually mean? It means that they don't stop enough for nothing to happen around them to say, what could I go and do? Or what could I go and find myself to do? Or, do I rely on somebody to have to provide me with something all the time? And that's what parents, I think, feel like they have to do sometimes, that they think parenting's so hard because they're always asking for this, or I need help with that, or they want me to take us here or take us there. And look, places like Bounce and Latitude and these sorts of places are great, right? But do you know what's even more awesome? Go to Mount Lofty, go
Go to the forest.
yeah,
Yeah.
like, go somewhere where there's hiking and stuff and kids hanging off trees and things, and go and explore nature. It's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
Go find a creek, get some boats, make some boats, and put the
Yeah,
boats
kids
down
will
the
spend
creek.
hours.
Yeah.
I really miss that now. I've got older kids, and we do still get outside, but it's harder for us to get outside together. I miss those, weekend camping trips and yeah, those like hours at the creek or in some sort of body of water. Kids just love that
Oh,
stuff.
absolutely. I think my son always needed it. He needed to be physically active all the time. And
Yeah.
even when he was 16, no, he was 16, he was like, all right, we're taking up surfing. And I said, I'm nearly 50, mate. Like,
Yeah.
I'm, but we did it. And until he could drive himself, I was in the water and he'd be paddling back and he'd catch catch every wave, not wait for the right wave, just do. But I was just looking at it and go, I'm so much happier to be doing this than
Mm.
seeing him on that screen.
Yes.
Right. And
Yeah.
it bugged me.
And it's another example. And, maybe not all of us are up for going surfing with our kids, but my husband's a really good example as well. He just got back him and my son just went on a mountain bike trip to Tasmania. And, my son's giving my husband a hard time, like, oh, he couldn't keep up with me. And I'm like, mate, how many other 52-year-old dads are even getting on that mountain, on that mountain bike?
Absolutely. I wouldn't. God, no, not in a bike down a hill. No way.
Yeah,
No
it's
way.
crazy. I don't want to know what they're doing. They're flying down those hills. But again, like, yes, it's risky, but I'd rather him be out doing that than watching another YouTube video.
But what a memory with his dad. Like
Yeah.
what an amazing memory that he gets to have. And then he gets to have hopefully with his children one day.
Yes,
That's what he did.
exactly.
Like it's, this is what we do. That's what we do. We go camping or we do mountain biking or we do whatever it is. If and look, it doesn't mean if parents aren't physically capable of doing those things that they can't encourage their children to. That's there's maybe a reason, but you can still celebrate that with your children as well. That's so important. Kids, you give them the option to spend time doing something awesome with you outside of the home, or say, hey, you can play on the PlayStation for 3 hours. Now, I'm sure some kids will choose the PlayStation, but you do it often enough, I guarantee you they will start to choose the option with the parent. They will. They 100% will, but you have to be available for it.
Yeah, totally. And I guess I just want to give another example because I am not as adventurous as the boys. Like, I will not be on a mountain bike, and neither will my daughter. So we will, we love swimming in the ocean together or going to watch the sunset. So it doesn't have to be those, hardcore adventurous activities either.
No, and it is about the meaningful time together.
Yeah.
And you don't have to talk. It can just be being in the same place together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And preferably outside.
Oh, look, I'm yeah, it's very hard. I had a different career before in OT, and I spent most of my time being outside, and then being inside, even though it's a play environment, you do feel this sense sometimes of loss of orientation, like and just being outside and having the sun on your face, or smelling the air that's outside as well. Like, it's so important, so
Yeah.
important.
It really is the best therapy. I know when I'm feeling overwhelmed or, off balance at all, like, I know that a walk outside or just even sitting outside is always going to make me feel better. So much, I could sit here talking to you for hours, but I know your time is valuable. I want to finish with, maybe something tangible. If a parent could shift one thing this week to better support their child's development or regulation, what would you suggest?
Introduce them to a new game of something. Like, pick something. It could be as simple as playing a game of Uno. If they haven't learned how to play it and at the right age, play that game with them. If they're younger, it could be just teaching them something like cause and effect, where they have blocks they have to build up and you roll balls and knock them over. If they're a little bit older, then, and it's a family thing, and teach them how to play a chess game or something like that. Like, if it's indoors, right? If not, it's the simplest thing, and I would say this to parents time and time again, is go for a half an hour walk, right? Just get out and walk. And you don't have to talk. Like, sometimes it happens naturally, but you change one small thing a week and you can change so much in that just that short period of time. Don't
Yeah.
think it has to be a massive
A huge
change.
thing. Yeah.
Just a simple, small thing. And
Yeah.
you know what? They might say, no, I don't want to play that game.
Yeah.
And that's okay. But you might try it again the next day.
Yeah.
You're not going to change habits, and they're not going to change the way they are in an instant. You have to be patient with it if it's never happened
Yes.
in your family.
Yeah, so true. So don't give up. And I just wanted to add to the like go for a walk. So, a lot of kids will go, no, I don't want to go for a walk, but think of something that they might want to do. Let's go
Ice
collect some
cream.
shells on the
Ice
beach,
cream.
or
Let's go
ice
get an
cream.
ice
Yeah,
cream.
let's go get an ice cream. Or let's go, spot some kangaroos or whatever it might be, depending on where you're walking. Because I think, going for a walk is often met with, no, I don't want to go for a walk. That my 16-year-old daughter will always say, no, I don't want to go for a walk. But if I say, let's go watch the sunset,
Yeah.
then that
And
always
that's a
works with
good
her.
point. Yeah. My
Yeah.
son was always food. If we were going to get an ice cream,
Yes.
or we're going to get like pancakes or something, he was like out the door, ready to go. But if you said, let's
Yeah.
go for a walk, no, don't want to do it. You're right.
Yeah.
100%.
Let's walk to the cafe and get some pancakes.
Yeah.
Yes, I love that. All right. I know you did talk a little bit about what you guys offer, but is there anything you want listeners to know? Like if people are listening and thinking, okay, this sounds really interesting. I'd love to explore, OT for my child. Where can they find you and more about what you do?
Okay. So look, if you search OTFC on like in a web browser, you'll always come up with like our page at some point. But my advice to parents is always ask around, ask other parents. Word of mouth is a very, very strong, a really, really strong source of referral for us. And even though we have a presence in social media, we very much rely on, if we've provided a good service, others obviously will reflect that as well in what they say about our service. I would always ask parents to ask people like pediatricians or people they're already engaged in, is this service the right service? Now, we're a sensory-based practice, so we virtually cover everything that's possible, but sometimes it doesn't mean we're the place that's the right fit for that family either. We are a clinic-based service wherever we are. We don't do school-based or community-based OT. We find that our best results are when we work in a clinic with a family. So that's a strong point of difference, and something that can be difficult for parents to organise to access as well. But within South Australia, we're probably more well known, so a lot of families do access our services. So it's like everything. Getting in just requires a phone call. You don't need a referral, but sometimes it does help. But we have a process where we do an intake call and we determine the suitability of the client. So sometimes they call asking for speech therapy, but it's not an OT's area, and we'll refer on. We're really based in if children have that aversion to doing things, if they are not developing motor-wise or learning-wise in the way that we would expect them to, if their behavior suggests that they're struggling, like they can be frustrated, avoidant. Sometimes we've helped find out what's the root cause of that and refer on if that's needed. But yeah, that's there. I guess sometimes we're a diagnosis of what we call exclusion. When everything else has been sort of covered and nothing else fits, sometimes it's sensory.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I will make sure the links to you guys are in the show notes. So if anyone wants to, have a look and explore. And OTFC stands for Occupational Therapy for Children, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. And you've got centers or clinics, do you call them?
We have clinics. We have clinics in South Australia. So we have Central, East, and West. We have one in the country in Berry as well. So we service the Riverland community as well. We also have a clinic in the Gold Coast in Burleigh Heads, and we have one in Moorabbin in Melbourne and another one in Camberwell in Melbourne. And they're all the clinics are run and all the therapists are trained in exactly the same way. They are not a franchise. We're not a franchise service. They are directed and run centrally from the in Parkside from our core base, but we all run exactly the same way.
Amazing. Thank you. Well, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to chat with you. Thanks for joining us.
Anytime. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. Head on over to our website, naturalsuperkids.com, for the show notes for this episode, as well as a whole heap of inspiration to help you raise healthy and happy kids. I'll see you next week.